Without further ado, please welcome Senator Mike Rounds. Do you want the podium or do you want the lapel mic?
No, this is fine. Yeah, this is great. Thanks, Josh. I think it's good afternoon now, if I checked right. I thought I'd be careful, so before I came in, I turned my cell phone off just so it couldn't be hacked while I was up here. Let me just begin by saying I wanted to say thank you to Dakota State University for hosting the DakotaCon 2016, as well as to the many sponsors who have helped to make this conference a reality. Let me just tell you right now, I am not an expert in any way, shape, or form with regards to anything to do with cybersecurity, but I want to lay this out in terms of a perspective from someone who is in the United States Senate, who cares about what it means to our country. So today, I want to first say thank you to all of those sponsors that are helping to make this thing work. But most importantly, I want to express my gratitude to all of you in the audience for your contributions to cybersecurity in the 21st century. Whether you are a professor, a student, or a practitioner in the private or public sector, you are working to address one of the foremost issues that we find ourselves with today. Protecting our citizens, our infrastructure, and our military from cyber attacks must be a top priority for the federal government. It is achievable, but it will require the cooperation of Congress, the White House, the Pentagon, the Department of Homeland Security, and perhaps most importantly, the private sector, who will play a crucial role in providing security in the cyber world. DakotaCon advertised this event as South Dakota's premier security event, all in the middle of a cornfield. Many of you in the audience are familiar with DSU's success story. That's why you're here, to give back, to help, to train our next generation, and to learn from one another. And we can't emphasize enough that Dakota State University is a national model of success in producing our future cyber workforce. In 2019, just 3 years from now, Michael Brown, the CEO of Symantec, predicted the cybersecurity workforce demand will rise to 6 million individuals with a projected shortfall of 1.5 million. So there's going to be a huge demand for all of you. U.S. Cyber Command in particular is seeking to recruit 4,000 cyber professionals to assemble 133 teams with various missions by the year 2018. In order to adequately protect our nation's networks and maintain our information security dominance in the future, we must make certain our workforce can meet these increased demands. And DSU is doing just exactly that right here in South Dakota. 1 out of 3 DSU students studies computer science or cybersecurity in some capacity. Since 2012, the university has seen an 83% increase in students majoring in one of its 3 cybersecurity majors. DSU was also the first college in the United States to offer a major in cybersecurity and is one of 14 universities endorsed by the National Security Agency as a center of academic excellence in cybersecurity operations. I'm proud of all the work DSU's leadership, professors, and students are doing to become a national leader in cybersecurity education and training. This success is a result of the committed faculty and university's leadership's efforts to integrate technology into the culture of the entire campus. Dakota State University's leadership has proven that universities in rural states can provide a world-class program and students that prepare them for high-demand 21st century jobs, all in the middle of a cornfield. Today I've been asked to talk about legislating cybersecurity, but really I want to focus on how we in Congress can work with you, who are truly the experts, to produce sound cybersecurity policy. In Congress, we're pulled in many different policy directions every single day. Those of you in the audience, on the other hand, are the experts in the trenches addressing cybersecurity on a daily basis. Your expertise on these issues is valuable and must be a part of any congressional legislative effort. And Congress must work to be more inclusive when legislating cybersecurity. After all, Congress simply makes the law. You are the ones who will be most affected when a bill goes into effect. So after my remarks, while I'm happy to take your questions, I'm more interested in hearing from you on how we can better address our cyber challenges. That being said, let me quickly update you on what we're working on in Congress related to cyber at this time. I'll Start with the bipartisan Payments Innovation Caucus, which I'm co-chairing with Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. The goal of the caucus is to explore new and innovative technologies in the payments industry and to address how we can protect our online payments from cyber threats. This is especially important to me because, well, and to South Dakota, as we have been a leader and an innovator in the payments industry. The technology payments industry impacts nearly every corner of our economy and is changing just as rapidly as it is growing. As technology has expanded to the reach of mobile payments, South Dakota's role in the world economy has grown substantially as well. Sioux Falls has been called the town that credit built. And a few months ago, I visited a startup company in Rapid City that is rolling out a new point-of-sale device that uses biometric data to authorize a payment. I'm proud of South Dakota's leading role in payments innovation, yet it highlights the need to keep consumer data safe from hackers by enacting proper security measures to combat online threats. Our goal with this caucus is to make sure that all interested parties are aware of the issues important to the industry, to meet growing needs, and to keep consumer data safe and secure. One piece of cybersecurity legislation in which we've listened to industry to craft was the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, or CISA, which passed the Senate with my support and was signed into law last December. Many of us in Congress understand that CISA is not a cure-all for cybersecurity, but what it does offer is a voluntary program for businesses to participate in cyber threat information sharing with appropriate liability protections. I welcome comments from the audience as to how this legislation could be improved, as well as offer alternative policy options to improve cybersecurity. In addition, Congress also recently passed the North Korea Sanctions and Policy Enhancement Act with my support, and it was signed into law on February 18th of this year. This law empowers the U.S. Treasury Department to freeze the assets of North Korean entities who engage in significant malicious cybersecurity activity. This law and the Treasury Department sanctioning authority sets a precedent and expands the tools available to the U.S. government to respond to a significant malicious cybersecurity attack. While these efforts are a step in the right direction, more must be done. Congress must work to establish business-friendly rules that can be used for the private sector and the federal government. We must incentivize the public sector to invest in increasing its network security. We must find opportunities to provide legal clarity on permissible tools so cybersecurity professionals can do their job with confidence. And we must also address cyber threats under the national security umbrella. As a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, we have been looking intensely at cyber threats from a national security perspective. In the 21st century, it doesn't take a large army or the latest defense technology to tap into a nation's critical infrastructure, which could damage a nation's entire economy and significantly disrupt daily life. As our enemy's tactics grow more sophisticated, we must be even more diligent in our defense. This brings into question the role of the Defense Department with regard to cybersecurity. An important component of the United States national security policy is having a strategy in place to make certain our country is prepared to respond to a particular event. After countless armed service meetings and briefings, I found our readiness in the cyber domain lacking. Congress has not yet determined what constitutes an act of war in the cyber domain. It needs to do so before an attack occurs to enable the Pentagon to respond in real time, since cyber attacks happen literally in milliseconds. A cyber attack does not allow time for deliberation and debate, as is the case in conventional warfare. In my view, a cyber attack on critical infrastructure that causes physical damage and affects a kinetic attack could be considered an armed attack. One might warrant a military response. The Pentagon can respond to an attack on its own networks, as it has the right to self-defense. The standing rules of engagement to fire when fired upon. But these are defensive actions. It is also critical for the Defense Department to have the offensive, maybe call it counterstrike capability, to deter an attack on critical infrastructure. Such an attack can already be perpetrated by a number of state actors, countries in particular. One day, if not already, a non-state actor may also have the ability to mount such an attack. Thus, a cyber attack must be a major focus of the Defense Department's doctrine and operational planning. We have made some progress. In 2010, when the Deputy Defense Secretary William Lynn stated, and I'll quote him, as a doctrinal matter, the Pentagon has formally recognized cyberspace as a new domain of warfare, end of quote. I believe we are now striving to determine how to best operate in this new domain. And in doing so, the Pentagon faces a number of challenging issues as it undertakes roles such as blocking foreign hackers targeting domestic systems, assisting U.S. combat troops oversee and defending military networks. Let me just touch on a few of the challenges. First is the need to operationalize cyberspace. That means creating command and control systems that enable cyber operations that are integrated with other military capabilities based on a keen situational awareness. A second challenge is formulating and maintaining deterrent strategies as the range of actors and capabilities continue to evolve rapidly and very unpredictably. A third challenge, and one of particular interest to me, is clarification of the Pentagon's authority to respond to attacks on critical infrastructure. In the days ahead, I look forward to working with my Armed Services Committee colleagues and helping the Defense Department meet these challenges. And time may be short. According to reports, the terrorists responsible for the recent attacks in Paris used sophisticated encryption apps to communicate and carry out their attacks. This is further proof that our enemy's technological capabilities are growing more sophisticated. In some ways, we face a situation which is not unlike the situation our armed forces faced in the run-up to World War II. At that time, our Army and our Navy were compelled to rapidly acquire and operationalize new military technologies and their associated operational concepts. They were compelled to do so in the face of potential enemies who were already far advanced in adoption of such revolutionary technologies and concepts. I see it as my job and the job of my colleagues to make certain we get it right sooner this time. One example of our to improve cyber defense, the Department of Defense Cyber Support to Civil Authorities Act of 2015, which I offered last year. The provisions of this bill were included in the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2016. This provision, which is now law, will require a comprehensive plan for U.S. Cyber Command to support civil authorities in responding to cyber attacks by foreign powers against the United States. This contribution is but a small step forward in increasing our preparedness. Importantly, any national defense cyber strategy must be ungirdled by a solid core of cybersecurity professionals who can implement that strategy. We're talking about you. With that in mind, I recently introduced the Cyber Command Employment Personnel Training Act of 2016. This bill would improve the Department of Defense's hiring practices for cybersecurity professionals by making certain that the department's hiring officials are trained on new rules for hiring and pay flexibilities for civilian cybersecurity employees. These rules permit faster hiring and higher pay for these employees than is normally the case for the U.S. Civil Service. Improving the training for hiring officials at the Department of Defense, who play a vital role in the hiring of civilian cybersecurity professionals, can help assure the U.S. military is working with the best talent possible. Additionally, it will enhance the Defense Department's ability to hire young, qualified cybersecurity professionals from schools such as DSU. Specifically, the bill will require training for department-level human resources staff that manage the civilian workforce, training staff that write implementing guidance for hiring and pay flexibilities, and also training supervisors and hiring managers that use or would use the flexibilities that are allowed within this bill. There is a great amount of work to be done to meet the many challenges of cybersecurity, but I really believe, I'm confident, that we can meet these challenges. Just as our can-do American spirit founded our nation, settled the West, won 2 world wars, and put a man on the moon, so can we conquer the cyber world and mitigate its threats. We have the most innovative military and the most innovative economy in the world. And we have men and women, like you, committed to addressing cybersecurity concerns in the 21st century. I hope that DakotaCon 2016 has furthered the dialogue for all of you on how we can best protect our citizens, our military, and the federal government from cyber threats. With that, let me just open this up, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. I'm happy to see that you've gathered here. I know that you've got some competition and so forth going on later in the day and so forth, but I just want you to know that you truly are on a leading edge of something here that a lot of folks are struggling to understand and to learn about. And in doing so, we're trying to integrate into what we see and the challenges that we see. We're trying to integrate ways in which we can utilize the talents that you're developing and may in many cases already have developed. So with that, let me just open this up. If you've got questions, thoughts, advice, I would be more than happy to have you express them at this time. Yes? How do you recommend balancing the need for privacy and encryption with the need for law enforcement to be able to remove that encryption possible? Multi-billion-dollar question, and we truly are struggling with that right now. I think you saw earlier, I think there was a bill that was going to come before Congress, and now I'm not sure that it will, which would have made some sort of a guidance required that would have said something along the lines of, if you're going to create an encrypted item, they were going to debate at least the possibility of requiring that you also be able to share with law enforcement how to get into it if necessary. Now is the case with Apple. As we found out, they went out and let's just call them cybersecurity experts, security experts, have found a way to get into it. And now I notice that Apple is saying, well, wait a minute, how'd you do that? One way that we might want to talk about this, and we had a little bit of a discussion on this earlier in the day, there are the good guys who would love to figure out ways and of getting in and around into areas that normally would be considered private. But how do you identify who the good guys are, who are trying to find ways to get in and to fix things, versus the guys who are trying to get in to be able to take advantage of it for inappropriate purposes? Maybe one way is to identify up front who the good guys are, to have them literally identify themselves up front. And in doing so, to provide some sort of protection for them for getting in, as long as there's some point in the future where they clearly have to identify that they've gotten in, and will then share what those holes are, how they did it. This is brand new. This is not something that we in Congress have found ourselves facing on a daily basis. In a lot of cases, there's years and years of court documentation about what invasion of privacy is. And in many cases, it has not been something which has been legislated. It's been a constitutional discussion about personal rights. So this is kind of new for us. And part of it is learning just exactly what the thought processes are about what is private, what is not private. And if someone has the capability to get into it, do they have an obligation to notify folks that they've got a door or a window open? It used to be that on Main Street, police officers wouldn't go around and check all the doors and windows of mercantile establishments, but the merchants would walk out and they'd hire a mercantile group that would every night would go around and check doors, check windows, and they'd walk into if you left it open, they'd walk on in and make a call to the owner and say, hey, you left your front door open, or you left your back door open, or gee, you got windows open down here. They were never charged with breaking and entering. They were expected that was part of what they did. But they were identified up front, and they were licensed. I don't know if there's any possibility on something like that or not, but there may be some possibilities that would work because we've clearly entered a new reign, or we've entered a new era where you've got folks with capabilities and education and talents that can be used for good. The question is how do we access them? And I'm not sure if I'm answering the question or not, but I really think we have to talk about, I like the idea that Apple had said, look, we're not going to give you information because we've got an encrypted system here, and if we did that, then what we've encrypted here, it's no longer as solid as it was before. But I also think the surprising move in this is that it wasn't as encrypted as what they thought it was. It wasn't as secure as they thought it was, or it wouldn't have been broken. So now the next question is it simply a run-up to where there's got to be multiple lines of defense once again, and is this going to be an ever-changing technology almost challenge that's going to go in where every 3 months you're going to get a new update from Apple or from someone else saying, we've got a new series of here that we think you ought to get in, and now you're going to, I just got another one you did too on your phone saying there's a new level of encryption that we can now use. For a while, I think that's what we're going to see is it's going to be a strategy of, we can make it better, we're going to make it faster, we're going to make it bigger, just like we've seen in defense strategies with regard to first, second, third, fourth, and now fifth generation fighter aircraft and bomber aircraft. So the race is on. I don't have a better answer right now, but that's the reason why we're here is to say, look, we got to learn about it. You folks are going to live with it. You folks understand it better than we do. If you can help us by giving us information, maybe you can stop us from doing damage by writing the wrong kind of a law. And if we try to write it in a void, we'll make a mistake. So as much as anything else, it's look at it and tell us what can be done, what can't be done, what you see as right, and what you see as an inappropriate way to try to legislate a language that's going to hurt our ability to protect the security of this country. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so thank you for being here. Along those same lines, you spoke about speaking to experts when you were discussing the Cyber Information Sharing Act. It's been my impression from everything I've read that the vast majority of experts in the field were publicly against it, namely Facebook, Microsoft, Google, all of those companies that theoretically would have benefited from the information sharing. So what did that conversation look like?
Question, how was it when there was opposition from a lot of the groups that were out there? A lot of it was a matter of what could be done at the time, because in the Senate, it's not a matter of what can pass the House of Representatives. It's a matter of what can pass the House of Representatives and the Senate. In the House of Representatives, which is primarily Republican, 51% of the folks together can make a deal. In the Senate, it's not that way. It takes 60%. Which means you've got to have Republicans and Democrats side by side agreeing to something. So it slows the process down. It allows for more discussion to occur. But when it's all said and done, it's a matter of what can both parties agree is something that is livable today. When it was all said and done, this was the closest thing that we could come up with to something that those individuals who were directly involved in the negotiations felt was the closest thing that they could get. And it is not perfect, and they'll all tell you that they don't think it was perfect, but they thought they had moved the ball forward somewhat. And that honestly is the way that in the Senate you'll find most items addressed. It'll never be perfect for one side or the other, and you'll have very strong points of view on either side, but it'll never even get to the floor unless you have 60 votes out of 100 that even agree to discuss the bill in the first place. In other words, in the Senate, just to debate the discussion on CISA. Before you ever amend it, you had to have 60 people agree out of 100 that they would begin to debate. And what's happened over the last couple of decades is they want their deal made before they ever get it to the floor. And then once it gets to, so that before they'll even allow, either party will allow the 60 votes to happen, they want most of it put together. And then once they get it to the floor, then we can have debates on discussions based upon the rules that are set aside for each separate bill that comes up. And then they may say we're going to allow for 10 amendments, or we're going to allow for 3 amendments per side, or we're not going to allow any amendments at all. It's whatever the groups decide on before they ask for the 60 vote count. And then once that happens and it's brought to the floor, based on the rules in place, you may have small amendments, you may have some large amendments that are debated, but you still, when you're all said and done, in order to stop debate on the bill, you got to have 60 out of 100 that have heard from their constituents, have heard the positives and the negatives, and now weighed, is this better than what it was before? And in this particular case, what you ended up with was a group of folks out there saying, look, we know it's not perfect, but at least we've moved the ball forward from where it will be, and it'll give us a chance to take the next steps. And in many cases, that happens because there are certain folks within each conference that have more expertise in an area than others do. And the more of those individuals that you can make contact with and share that information with, the better off you are. In a lot of cases, what happens in the Senate, and I'm brand new, I've been there for a year, a lot of the determination about whether or not a bill is good or not is based upon who is sponsoring the bill, who is endorsing the bill, and credible discussion from those individuals who are having expertise on those bills. So if you walk into the Senate and you have a discussion about a bill and it has to do with a particular area, most of the senators will say, well, you really need to talk to so-and-so because they've got expertise in this area, and before it'll move, you've got to get them on your side. And in this particular case, the folks who had the bill, who were working on the bill and so forth, who stepped into it, had enough expertise on it and credibility on it to say, look, we know it's not perfect, but it's the best thing we can do right now. We would recommend that you vote for it, but we're going to have to come back and readdress it again. We know we will. And that's what happened. What else? I see 2 here. I'll go all the way in the back. Yes, sir. Well, I had wondered where it had come from because I was not aware of where they were at, where they had done it. But the first thought that I had was I wonder if they were in violation of a current federal law when they did it, and whether or not they had gone in and tried to negotiate the deal with the Department of Justice before they announced that they could get in and do it. So you're giving me some new information that I did not know before I walked in. And yeah, if they could do it outside of the country, once again, now here's a case of where you say, all right, the country is probably illegal, but if you can go outside the country and you can do it, you can bring it back in. You found another way to skin this thing. And I didn't realize that it was that particular case, but that was one of the questions that we had earlier this morning when we were discussing it is I wonder how they got past that point and whether or not they picked up immunity before they ever did it. So thank you for sharing that. I'm learning. There was another question down here. Yes. I don't know of anything within South Dakota, and honestly, I'd probably know more about it if I was in the state Senate or the state House right now. Once again, when you start talking about whether or not you're creating a law, are you creating a crime, and whether or not, it's one thing to have a data breach and to be responsible for it. The question is who is responsible for the data breach? It becomes more complicated because you have multiple entities that may be responsible. And I'm not sure if I'm going down the same path that you're wondering about, but let me just give you an example. In our Innovations Caucus, our Payments Innovations Caucus, if you have a data breach right now, if you talk to the banks, they're saying, look, our systems are we're getting pretty good with it, but we're pushing merchants. And if you take a look at where the data breaches have occurred, they've occurred at the mercantile level. Well, the merchants are saying, look, we're using systems that are set up by banks. They're the ones that really should be following this stuff up. Now, they've both got good points, but now do you make a corporation criminally liable for something, or do you simply say there is if you're found civilly liable for it, if you've got a problem on it, that's one thing to have to pay back and to make people whole who have been damaged by a breach of security that's cost someone something. But do you then make it a criminal offense? Now you're talking about an entirely different thing. And I think that's probably where part of the question is do you take someone who is really the victim and you now say, because you were the victim on this thing, you didn't have appropriate security in place, we will now charge you with a crime. Well, how do you, I'm not sure you're going to get real far with it that way. Is that what you're wondering about? You know, part of what we've tried to do is to make it easier for businesses that find areas where they've been breached to share with one another. And in doing the sharing, to make sure that there are not privacy issues, that if they can keep the privacy of the individuals but still release the data, that it's not considered a breach of privacy, to allow them to share with other entities who may be in the same boat about what happened and how they got in. We're trying to make it easier for them to do so, and that's what the legislation has been focused on in the past, is to make it easier for businesses to share that data so that once it happens in one place, it doesn't happen again and again. That's been the focus so far, but I'll guarantee you the laws are not perfect, and it's going to take folks asking questions about how you put the pressure on folks to make it better, and then how do you help them rather than harming them to where they say, gee, I don't even know if I want to offer that service if I'm also going to be criminally liable should somebody get in and breach it and make me a victim, but then I'm responsible as a victim for what somebody else has done to me. Is there a level of competency which is expected? Okay, it's kind of like liability. You have gross negligence and then you have negligence. If you get to the point of gross negligence on something, you may very well have some criminal issues involved in it. But if you simply have negligence, it means you might not have done your best job, but you didn't do anything intentionally wrong. And there's a difference between the two. Perhaps sometimes in the future, and this is where you folks step in. Is there a way to determine gross negligence when it comes to security? Is there a way to identify negligence versus gross negligence? And is that something that we want to be looking at the federal level? I think whatever you do, when it comes to security breaches and so forth, because of the interstate commerce clause, information that goes on, it crosses all state lines, you'd be much better off to have a national standard as opposed to a state standard. Yeah. Okay. Personally, I don't think so. I think I've got on my staff, I've got 4 people that got hacked. These are folks that have been longtime employees of the federal government. They've come in, they've worked with me, they've been hacked. They've been assured that they've got coverages, protection, but that data, I mean, look, I'm one of these folks that has a real question about it. With all due respect, I don't trust any more information with the federal government than I absolutely have to. And the reason is because I have no reason to believe that they're any better than anybody else at keeping data secure. And I think they're just as vulnerable as anybody else is when it comes to being hacked. And that's part of the problem we've got right now. You take a look at the payroll records, and you take a look at the personal information that's been lost so far by a fairly large number of individuals. I mean, millions of people. I know what it's done to the folks in my office and how nervous they are about the fact that for the rest of their lives they're going to wonder when it shows up, personal information about them and their families. And I was irritated. I mean, we were all mad about it. And you wonder how in the world can this kind of a data breach happen to the federal government who is telling the rest of us what we're supposed to be doing. So, when we start talking about, well, we're going to make people share more information with the federal government, there's a group of us, and it's a fairly large group, that says, time out here for a second. If we're going to be doing that, better darn we'll be able to offer some additional assurances that the data that we are keeping, we're going to do everything we can to protect it, and we've got some double checks on it. Let me just step in on one thing, and then I know I'm going past my time, but there's something here. It's an oversight responsibility that we've got, and sometimes we're not really good at oversight, and it's something that we're going to be talking more about. I believe we've got oversight committees, but every once in a while we get frustrated because even though we're a Congress, sometimes we don't do a good job on oversight because in many cases we have limitations about what we can do. We can bring it up, we can talk about it. I did an oversight hearing yesterday on the Corps of Engineers. We were talking about the fact that they had a major flood in 2011. In fact, I called it the Corps flood of 2011. They had major water come into the basin, the upper Missouri River Basin, in 10 and 11. They had the dams full. Then they got a huge rain in March and April, and in May. And in doing so, they weren't prepared for it. And they had a major flood. In fact, it was over the banks for probably close to 3 months. Well, you look at it and you say, how'd this happen? And you go back in and they can give you reports and studies. And one of the reports said, we just didn't have enough data about how much water was coming in. And back in 2014, they actually said, we got to have a report. We've got to put in more water monitoring. We've got to find out how much the soil can hold, how much moisture the soil, how much back we've got, how much water we've got coming down through the creeks and all the tributaries. They've been doing it for 60 years. But now they need all this additional information in order to be able to accurately determine how quick the water's coming in. So in 2014, they were authorized under what they call WRDA. And in WRDA, it directed them, along with a couple other departments, to put together, to come back in and to lay out a plan to get all this stuff ready to go. They helped write it. Yesterday at our hearing, they announced, well, we just haven't done anything on it because we don't have the money from Congress. I said, what do you mean you don't have the money from Congress? You helped write the bill. It's been 2014. You had 2014. You had 2015. You had 2016. The president's already laid out his proposal for appropriations for 2017. So in my oversight responsibility, I'm saying you've now been 3 years. You're supposed to have this report. You suggest you've got a report coming, and now you have the audacity to suggest to us that you don't have the money to get a report done to tell us how much money you need in order to put in the monitoring devices in the first place. How could you even make an appropriation request unless you've done the study? No response. So here's a case of where oversight is there, but we don't have much of an authority here except to slap them on the wrist, bring about it publicly, talk about it publicly, and then to go back in. So they'll go back to their daily lives again and say, well, we went through that again, we got our butts chewed a little bit, and life is good. Except this time it's not going to be, because now we're going to go back in and we're going to chase this thing up the ladder and go up with it. So when we talk about the oversight, and I'm getting off of this a little bit, but it's the same thing when it comes to the federal government on collection of data. They can make mistakes, but unless we have a good system of oversight to ask the questions and then to get a response in a timely fashion about what they're doing to fix it, and then to make sure that when they tell us they're going to fix it, that they actually do, or there will be repercussions, life will just go on. The bureaucracy will continue on. So for me, if you ask me, should you voluntarily provide personal data? Absolutely not. If you're required to, yeah, you're required to, but then we've got an additional obligation to try to keep it safe. And that's where we need your help. You're the experts in this thing. And we need to hire the best and the brightest. And that's where you folks fall into this thing. That's the reason why I'm here today, is to tell you, you're critical to this country's future needs for security. I'm glad to see that you're here. We want you here, but we need your help. And part of it is you've got to tell us how we write laws correctly, when we screw it up, and what we've got to do to change it, because you're in the trenches. But even more than that, we need you to look at helping us at the federal level and at the state level and at the business level to help protect that data. You get to be on the front lines, and we can't do it without you. With that, I know that they're going to pull me off here, but I just once again say thank you. I'm glad you're here. You are very, very important to the future of this country, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future. And at the same time, thanks for letting me come in and vent. Appreciate it. Have a good one.